With trembling fingers, Karen dialed the number on the mysterious business card. A gruff voice answered on the first ring. "Reeves here. This is Karen Whitfield from Oak Ridge Estates," she began, her voice more uncertain than it had been in years. "I found your card, but I don't recall a security committee." "I know who you are, Mrs. Whitfield," the voice interrupted, "and you're right to be concerned. We've been monitoring the situation. Can you meet me at the community center in 30 minutes? Karen hesitated. Meeting an unknown person after receiving a threatening note seemed unwise. Yet something in the man's confident tone reassured her. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You cited me 3 times last month for my blue house on Maple Drive," he replied matter-of-factly. "Said it was 2 shades darker than the approved Harbor Mist palette. You also photographed my Japanese maple and claimed it exceeded height restrictions." Karen instantly placed him, the stubborn homeowner of the ASO blue house she'd been fighting to have repainted for years. Not exactly a friend, but definitely a known entity. 30 minutes later, Karen pulled into the community center parking lot, noting with professional disapproval that the landscaping company had trimmed the hedges unevenly again. She'd need to document this violation later, assuming she lived through whatever was happening. The community center was empty except for 3 people sitting at a table in the corner. Mr. Johnson from 2 streets over, whose garbage bins she had reported 7 times. Mrs. Chen from the corner lot, who had been battling Karen about her unapproved vegetable garden for months. And Mrs. Patel, whose woolly decorations Karen had demanded be removed last year for excessive luminosity. Karen almost turned to leave when Marcus Reed stepped forward, tall and imposing with salt and pepper hair, and the confident bearing of someone used to being in charge. "We're the HOA Security Committee," Marcus explained, pulling out a chair for her. "Unofficial, of course." "I never authorized," Karen began automatically. "That's rather the point," Mrs. Chen interjected with a tight smile. "Some things work better without excessive regulation." Karen flushed, but sat down. On the table was a detailed map of Oak Ridge Estates with various markings, several folders of documents, and a laptop displaying what appeared to be security camera footage. "We've been watching your stalker for days," Marcus continued, opening one of the folders to reveal printouts of the white van at various locations. "And despite our differences regarding community aesthetics, no one deserves to be terrorized." Karen stared in disbelief as they revealed a sophisticated surveillance operation. Mrs. Chen had installed hidden cameras after noticing the suspicious van lingering near her vegetable garden, the same garden Karen had tried to have removed. "I thought it might be the HOA spying on my tomatoes," Mrs. Chen admitted with a wry smile. "But then I saw him watching your house." Mr. Johnson, a retired detective, a fact Karen had never bothered to learn despite 5 years of sending him violation notices, had run the plates and discovered the van's owner had a restraining order from another neighborhood. Mrs. Patel, whose morning walks Karen had often criticized for allowing her dog to linger too long near other homes, had been documenting the man's movements during those same early morning walks. "But why help me?" Karen whispered, genuinely bewildered. "I've made your lives miserable with citations." Marcus smiled grimly. "Because there's a difference between being a stickler for rules and being a predator. You may drive us crazy, but you're still our neighbor." For the first time in years, Karen felt something crack in her carefully maintained facade. These people she had treated as adversaries in her quest for neighborhood perfection had organized to protect her when official channels had failed. The trap was set with precision that even Karen had to admire, using her predictable schedule as bait. The very thing she now realized had made her vulnerable. The HOA Security Committee positioned themselves around her property the following evening. Karen sat in her living room, lights on as usual, silhouette visible through the curtains as she pretended to read the latest HOA newsletter. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to maintain the routine. Outside, unseen in the gathering dusk, her neighbors waited. Marcus was stationed behind the large oak tree that Karen had once complained was dropping too many leaves onto the community sidewalk. Mr. Johnson sat in his car 3 houses down, radio silent, his former police training evident in his stillness. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Patel, appeared to be taking an evening stroll, their route calculated to intersect with any approach to Karen's home. At 8:47 p.m., the white van pulled up 2 blocks away. Karen's security camera, installed without proper HOA approval paperwork, sent an alert to Marcus's phone. They watched as a hooded figure emerged, moving cautiously toward the side gate that led to Karen's backyard. The man carried something in his right hand, a bolt cutter, they would later discover, intended for the back door lock. He approached the gate with practiced stealth, unaware that this time, his target wasn't isolated behind her wall of regulations. The figure had just begun cutting the gate lock when a firm hand gripped his shoulder. "I wouldn't," Marcus said quietly, as Mr. Johnson blocked the escape route with surprising agility for a man in his 60s. The stalker's attempt to flee lasted approximately 4 seconds before he found himself efficiently pinned to the manicured lawn that Karen meticulously maintained at exactly 2.25 inches. Mrs. Chen had already dialed 911, with enough evidence collected to ensure police took the threat seriously this time. When Officer Jenkins arrived, his dismissive attitude vanished at the sight of the knife found in the suspect's pocket and the detailed documentation the committee had compiled, surveillance logs, photos, and witness statements prepared with the same methodical precision Karen applied to HOA violations. "You organized all this?" Officer Jenkins asked Karen incredulously as his partner handcuffed the suspect. "They did," Karen admitted, nodding toward her neighbors with newfound respect. "I just learned the value of community tonight." The stalker, as it turned out, was Daniel Fraser, a former resident who had lost his house after Karen had reported his multiple HOA violations, eventually leading to significant fines he couldn't pay. His revenge plot had been months in the making, fueled by bitterness and financial ruin. 2 weeks later, Karen stood before the monthly HOA meeting, shifting uncomfortably as all eyes turned to her. The agenda in her hands, usually filled with violation reports, looked different today. "Before we begin," she said, her voice lacking its usual authoritative edge, "I'd like to propose a new standing committee." She placed a plate of homemade cookies on the table, her first attempt at baking in years. Several residents eyed them suspiciously, as if they might contain cetaceans for improper garden mulch. "I've been thinking about our regulations," she continued hesitantly. "Perhaps some of them are a bit excessive." Marcus raised an eyebrow from his seat in the back row. "Are you suggesting changes to the sacred HOA rulebook?" A murmur ran through the room. Karen Whitfield, the regulation queen herself, was proposing flexibility? Karen nodded, a small smile forming. "Starting with the creation of an official security committee, and perhaps reconsideration of certain restrictions on seasonal decorations and garden vegetables." As the meeting progressed, Karen found herself truly seeing her neighbors for the first time, not as potential rule breakers, but as a community that had protected her when she needed it most. The HOA would still have standards, of course, she was still Karen after all, but perhaps with a bit more flexibility and a lot more humanity. Mrs. Patel leaned over with a conspiratorial whisper as they reviewed the revised holiday decoration guidelines. "Does this mean I can put up my Diwali lights next month?" Karen hesitated only briefly. "Yes, but we should discuss proper timer settings so they don't stay on all night." It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a start. The neighborhood watch signs that went up the following week were the first decorations in Oak Ridge Estates history to be approved unanimously, even by Karen herself. Karen Whitfield prided herself on maintaining the highest standards in Oak Ridge Estates. As the vice president of the Homeowners Association, she had earned a reputation for her meticulous enforcement of community guidelines. Her neighbors had nicknamed her the Regulation Queen. Behind her back, though few would dare challenge her face-to-face about the endless violation notices she distributed for infractions like garbage bins, left out 6 minutes past collection, or unapproved mailbox decorations. On a crisp autumn morning, Karen stood in her immaculate front yard, coffee mug in hand, mentally cataloging the day's potential violations. Her gaze drifted to the house across the street, a recent sale to a family she hadn't properly vetted yet. Something about their landscaping seemed off. Perhaps the hydrangeas were 2 inches taller than regulation. She made a mental note to measure them later. Karen's own Tudor-style home was the crown jewel of Oak Ridge Estates, a showcase of perfect symmetry with precisely trimmed boxwoods and color-coordinated seasonal flowers that never dared bloom out of turn. Her bronze Yard of the Month plaque, which she'd won 17 times in the past 5 years, gleamed in the morning sunlight. She'd worked tirelessly to make this neighborhood a place where property values soared and visitors marveled at the uniformity. Perfection was her passion, and regulations were her religion. She checked her watch, 7:45 a.m. exactly. Time to begin her morning patrol. Karen retrieved her leather-bound HOA notebook from her designer tote bag, along with her digital measuring tape and camera. Documentation was key to enforcement. Last week alone, she'd issued citations for 3 unapproved bird feeders, a mailbox that was 2 shades darker than permitted burgundy, and a basketball hoop visible from the street, a clear violation of Section 7, Paragraph 12 of the Community Guidelines. "Morning, Karen," called Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, watering her perfectly regulation-compliant petunias. Karen nodded curtly, noticing the woman's recycling bin was slightly visible from the street. Bins must be stored out of sight by 7:30 a.m. on non-collection days, she reminded, making a show of noting it in her book. Mrs. Rodriguez's smile faltered. "Of course, I was just about to. A written warning will be issued this time," Karen interrupted. "But next time it's a $50 fine." She continued her patrol, oblivious to the glare boring into her back. Just as she was about to head toward the Johnsons' house to investigate reports of an unauthorized wind chime, she noticed a battered white van slowly cruising down their street for the 3rd time that morning. It paused briefly in front of her house before continuing. Karen felt an unfamiliar chill run down her spine, something that had nothing to do with property values or bylaw infractions. The van's windows were tinted dark, making it impossible to see the driver, but she could feel someone watching her. Unlike the violations she so eagerly documented, this didn't fit into any of her neatly categorized regulations. Karen stood frozen, clutching her notebook to her chest as the van disappeared around the corner, leaving her with a strange sense of foreboding that no HOA manual had prepared her for. On Thursday morning, Karen stepped onto her porch to retrieve the newspaper and froze. Pinned under her welcome mat was an envelope with her name scrawled across it in jagged, aggressive lettering. Her first instinct was to check if the envelope violated any HOA regulations about unauthorized deliveries, a reflex that made her almost laugh hysterically at her own absurdity. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was a message composed of crudely cut magazine letters arranged in uneven rows. "I know your STEULD. I know will win EOURAA loan. Your rules can't protest you." Karen stumbled back inside, double-locking the door behind her. Her usual Thursday routine, inspecting the Millicents' new fence installation at 8:30, then reviewing paint swatches for the community mailbox renovation, suddenly seemed trivial. For the first time, she found herself wishing for her husband's presence. But Dave had left for his 3-day golf trip at dawn. After 3 attempts with shaking hands, Karen finally managed to dial the police. The dispatcher sounded bored, classifying it as a non-emergency situation. Officer Jenkins arrived 40 minutes later, a young patrolman who looked barely old enough to drive the cruiser he arrived in. He took cursory notes while glancing at his watch repeatedly. "Look, Mrs. Whitfield," he said, barely suppressing a yawn. "We get calls like this all the time. Probably just kids playing pranks because of your reputation around here." "My reputation?" Karen repeated, clutching the evidence bag containing the threatening note. Officer Jenkins shrugged. "The HOA stuff. My uncle lives over on Birch Street. Got fined $200 last month for having his garbage can visible from the street during a family emergency." His dismissive tone suggested this was just another paranoid complaint from the neighborhood busybody, karma finally catching up to her. His parting advice to keep her doors locked felt perfunctory at best. After he left, Karen paced her immaculate living room, the pristine cream carpets she'd once worried about staining now seeming like the least of her concerns. In desperation, she pulled out her meticulously organized HOA files. There had to be some protocol, some rule about community safety. She flipped through pages of regulations about lawn ornaments and fence heights, searching for something about security protocols. Section after section detailed the proper placement of holiday decorations and approved mailbox designs, but nothing about protecting residents from actual threats. In her frustration, she almost missed the business card that fell from between the pages of the security section, a section that was surprisingly thin compared to the extensive regulations on exterior paint colors. Marcus Reeves, head of HOA Security Committee, the simple white card read, with just a phone number below. Karen blinked in confusion, scanning her mental database of committee assignments. There was no security committee in their HOA. She would know. She had personally reorganized the committee structure 3 years ago and had memorized the organizational chart. Landscape, architectural review, social, maintenance, but no security. Yet somehow, this card had found its way into her rulebook, tucked between pages she referenced weekly. The paper was crisp, not weathered like it had been there long. Karen stared at it, torn between her suspicion of anything unauthorized and her growing desperation. With no other options, and the memory of that threatening note fresh in her mind, Karen made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days ago. She would reach out to someone outside the official HOA structure. The world was no longer operating according to her carefully constructed rulebook. Over the next week, Karen noticed the same van appearing at odd hours. It would park at different spots around the neighborhood, never staying too long, but always within view of her house. She took photos, recorded license plate numbers, and started keeping a detailed log of sightings, applying the same meticulous documentation skills she used for HOA violations to this unsettling situation. Tuesday, white van parked on Elm Street, 10:17 am to 10:32 am. License plate partially obscured. Thursday, same vehicle on Oak Drive, 3:45 p.m. Driver appeared to be taking photos. Friday, van spotted twice, 7:20 am, and again at 9:40 p.m. Lingered for 23 minutes during evening sighting. Karen tried to focus on her duties. There were Halloween decorations to inspect, nothing exceeding the permitted 12-inch height limit. Lawn maintenance to evaluate, grass between 2 to 2.5 inches as required, and the monthly HOA newsletter to distribute. But her attention kept drifting to windows and doorways, checking and rechecking marks. At the Tuesday HOA meeting, she found herself distracted, barely registering Mrs. Chen's impassioned plea to allow vegetable gardens in backyards. Instead of her usual vehement opposition, Karen merely mumbled something about reviewing the bylaws and moved to the next agenda item. Her husband Dave dismissed her concerns at dinner that evening. Probably just delivery drivers or contractors working on the Peterson renovation, he suggested before returning to his football game. He didn't even look up when she mentioned the hang-up calls they'd been receiving. "You're making enemies with all these violation notices, Karen," he said during a commercial break. "Maybe ease up a bit? The Hendersons are still furious about that fine for their kid's treehouse." But Karen knew better. Her methodical mind, so adept at spotting the tiniest deviations from HOA standards, recognized a pattern forming. The calls always came when Dave was out. 3 times this week, she'd found her garden gate unlocked when she was certain she'd secured it. And yesterday, she discovered distinct footprints in the mulch beneath her home office window. Size 11 men's shoes, approximately 190-pound individual based on impression depth. Karen installed a security camera above her front door without consulting the Architectural Review Committee. Her first deliberate violation of HOA rules in 15 years of residency. She'd deal with the paperwork later. Safety took precedence now. For the first time in years, Karen felt vulnerable in her own sanctuary. The rigid rules and perfect landscaping that once seemed like armor now felt like a facade, easily penetrated. Even more disturbing, none of her neighbors seemed to notice or care about the suspicious ban. When she mentioned it to Mrs. Rodriguez while inspecting her newly compliant recycling bin placement, the woman had simply shrugged. "Perhaps if you weren't so busy looking for rule violations, you'd have neighbors willing to watch out for you," Mrs. Rodriguez had said with surprising boldness. The comment stung more than Karen cared to admit. Had she alienated them so thoroughly with her rule enforcement that they'd ignore a potential threat? The thought kept her awake at night, peering through blinds at shadows moving across her pristine lawn, wondering if perfect property values were worth this growing sense of isolation.